Under the cherry blossoms, beauty hides a chilling secret. Welcome to Mystery Parlour. I am your host, Axen. This incredible community keeps growing. Tell me where you're tuning in from. Your comments always make these mysteries shine. Let's begin. On the second Saturday of April, the cherry trees of Flaxborough performed their annual spectacle. Pink confetti swirling like the sighs of bridesmaids, covering the pavements, bicycles, and dignitaries with impartial grace. It was the day of the Petal Parade, an event that combined civic pride, horticultural vanity, and a certain need to be seen outdoors in one's better clothes before the wind turned sharp again. At precisely 11:30, the parade halted. This was not an unusual occurrence. Halts were part of the Flaxborough parade tradition, usually to allow the town silver band to recover its breath or the borough surveyor to repin his boutonniere. But this halt had a different quality, silence edged with curiosity. It began with a small cough from Mrs. Bamble, secretary of the Floral Society, and ended with the mayor's wife turning pale beside her float of artificial wisteria. Someone had fainted, or so it was first thought. The unfortunate figure lay among the paper blooms of the Harmony in Nature exhibit, his trilby slightly crushed beneath a papier-mâché dove. 2 scouts from the 2nd Flaxborough troop stood nearby, holding their staves uncertainly, like altar boys unsure of the next response. "It's Mr. Pemble," whispered Mrs. Bamble, adjusting her hat as though the tragedy might have rumpled her feathers. "He's gone quite grey. Look at his lips. Oh dear." A doctor was called for, though 3 appeared. 2 retired and 1 only semi-practicing. They formed a murmuring huddle around the supine figure, each assessing the other's methods before agreeing that, yes, Mr. Pemble was deceased. By noon, the parade was officially dissolved. The band members tucked their instruments away with the quiet satisfaction of men released from civic obligation. Children dragged their confetti baskets home, and the mayor, in a whisper, hoarse with shock, instructed that the late Mr. Pemble's body be discreetly removed before the newspaper photographer returned from his sandwich. Inspector Purbright arrived just as the hearse backed carefully into position. His expression, mild as a tepid afternoon, betrayed no disturbance. He nodded to Sergeant Malley, who had been standing guard beside the float with the air of a man supervising the cooling of porridge. "Natural causes, sir," Malley reported promptly, hoping to close the matter before it grew untidy. "Dr. Bloxham says heart failure." The poor fellow must have overexerted himself waving to the mayor's wife. Purbright regarded the scene with faint amusement. "Possibly, Malley, though one wonders how much exertion is truly required for waving." He stepped closer to the float. The petals, pink and absurdly cheerful, clung to the edges of the platform. A few had adhered to Pemble's sleeve, which still rested awkwardly across his chest. "Mr. Pemble," Purbright murmured. "Wasn't he the clerk from the Building Society?" "Yes, sir. A quiet man. Lived with his sister in Brookfield Avenue. Known for his begonias." Purbright nodded. "A harmless hobby. Still, I doubt begonias would bring him to collapse amid papier-mâché doves." Malley frowned. "You think it wasn't natural, sir?" "I think," said Purbright mildly, "that we might confirm before assuming. There's often a distinction between a man's heart giving out and someone giving out his heart for him." By afternoon, the news had spread, though it had grown a variety of interpretations en route. At the Crown and Cushion, Mr. Wrigley, who claimed to have known Pemble since before decimalization, declared that the deceased had been on the verge of some sort of scandal, banking irregularities, I shouldn't wonder. At the hairdresser's, Mrs. Hargreaves confided that Pemble had looked pale for weeks, moonlighting for the council perhaps. And at the vicarage, Mrs. Prowse whispered to her husband that the Lord sometimes took the righteous in mysterious ways, to which the vicar, privately recalling Pemble's fondness for gin, offered a muted "quite." Back at the station, Purbright leaned back in his chair, gazing at the cherry petals drifting past the window. The scene outside was so prettily indifferent that one could almost forget the untidiness of human endings. "Malley," he said at length, "would you be so kind as to inquire whether Mr. Pemble's sister has been informed? And then ask Dr. Bloxham to provide a written statement, preferably one that includes whether the deceased's lips were truly grey, as reported, or merely blue under a pink umbrella." "Yes, sir," said Malley, though he had not the faintest idea why such detail should matter. Purbright smiled to himself. "In Flaxborough," he said, half to the drifting petals, "colour often tells us more than we think." By Sunday morning, the cherry blossoms along Market Street had begun to dull, their petals damp and flattening against the cobbles. The parade floats were being dismantled in backyards, revealing beneath their tissue paper splendour a lattice of broom handles and borrowed trestles. Only the Harmony in Nature banner remained unclaimed, draped forlornly over the railings outside the town hall, where someone had pinned a small black ribbon in the corner. Flaxborough, ever dignified in its gossip, had moved from speculation to confident assertion. Mr. Pemble's death was a warning about stress, according to the rector's wife, a tragedy of municipal proportions, according to the mayor, and a reminder that standing too long in the sun can do you in, according to the postman. The cause was debated, less for curiosity than for conversational hygiene. In a town where scandal travelled like perfume, every explanation was a form of self-protection. Inspector Purbright, meanwhile, preferred the quiet of the police station's records room, where Sergeant Malley found him that morning examining a set of yellowed ledgers. The inspector's manner suggested neither haste nor leisure, merely the satisfaction of a man allowing details to drift into place at their own pace. "Dr. Bloxham's report came in, sir," said Malley, setting a file on the desk. "He confirms heart failure, says it was quite instantaneous." Purbright glanced at the paper without reading. "Instantaneous," he repeated. "I wonder how one measures that exactly. A man's heart doesn't often fail on command." Malley hesitated. "He did say there were no external injuries, sir. Nothing suspicious." Purbright smiled faintly. "No injuries, no disturbance, no witnesses with anything useful to say. How very Flaxborough." He closed the ledger with a soft thump. "Still, let us not mistake tidiness for truth. Have you spoken with Miss Pemble?" "Yes, sir. She's at home. Quite composed, I'd say. Told me her brother hadn't been unwell. Bit of indigestion, perhaps, but nothing serious. She asked if he'd left his umbrella at the town hall. Odd thing to think of just then." "Umbrellas often outlast the people who use them," said Purbright mildly. "We'll call on her this afternoon." Brookfield Avenue was the kind of street that pretended to have money without the inconvenience of actually possessing it. Each house had its geraniums arranged with municipal neatness, and every gate creaked in the same apologetic tone. The Pemble residence, a narrow semi detached with lace curtains and a polished door knocker shaped like a lion's head, looked perfectly respectable, which in Flaxborough often meant perfectly dull. Miss Pemble opened the door before they knocked, a tall woman, angular but tidy, with a manner that suggested she had long ago made peace with the disappointment of living with a brother instead of a husband. "Inspector," she said, her tone both polite and resigned. "Do come in. I suppose you'll want to see his room. Everyone does." The everyone hung in the air like a small accusation, and Purbright wondered who else had already visited. Perhaps neighbours offering condolences wrapped in curiosity. They followed her into a sitting room that smelled faintly of lavender polish and something sharper, ink perhaps. A neat row of financial journals sat beside the fireplace. Above them, a watercolour of a lake scene, too tranquil to be English, hung slightly askew. "He was a quiet man, your brother?" Purbright asked gently. "Quiet," she said, "but not timid. He took pride in his work at the Building Society. People trusted him, you know. He never liked owing or being owed." "A commendable virtue," Purbright replied. "Had he seemed troubled lately? Ill at ease, perhaps?" Miss Pemble shook her head. He'd been rather cheerful these past weeks, in fact. Spoke of a new arrangement at the office that might make life easier, though he wouldn't tell me what it was. Said I'd find it dull. Mally, whose sense of subtlety resembled that of a dropped kettle, interjected. Did he have enemies, miss? She gave him a long, level look. Enemies? My brother. He was a clerk, sergeant, not a politician. Purbright smiled faintly. Sometimes those roles overlap. Her lips tightened, then relaxed. If you must know, the only person he ever spoke ill of was Mr. Harby, the society's treasurer. But that was professional, not personal. My brother had his opinions about figures not adding up as they should. Ah, said Purbright softly. Figures have a way of stirring strong emotions, particularly when they belong to other people. When they took their leave, Miss Pemble followed them to the door. Inspector, she said quietly, you won't let them make a spectacle of it, will you? The papers, I mean. He hated fuss. Purbright met her eyes, which were as dry and precise as her speech. I assure you, Miss Pemble, we dislike fuss even more than the deceased. Outside, the afternoon light slanted over the damp pavement, glinting on puddles of pink petals. Mally exhaled heavily. Seems straightforward, sir. Maybe he just overdid it. Parade excitement and all. Possibly, said Purbright. Yet I find excitement a rare cause of death among accountants. Did you notice the smell in that sitting room? Lavender polish, sir. Among other things. Ink. Very recent. And that crooked picture above the hearth. Someone's been searching, not dusting. Mally looked astonished. You think Miss Pemble? I think she's a woman accustomed to keeping things neat. Disorder in her drawing room would trouble her deeply, unless she were distracted by something greater. Let us see what that might be. As they reached the corner of the street, a small boy on a bicycle skidded past, scattering petals across the inspector's shoes. Purbright brushed them away absently, his expression unreadable. Mally, he said, make discreet inquiries at the Building Society tomorrow. Nothing formal, just a friendly chat. See whether Mr. Harby looks relieved or bereaved. Yes, sir. Purbright paused, glancing back at the line of neat houses, each holding its own little silence behind drawn curtains. In Flaxborough, he said thoughtfully, people seldom mean harm, but they do dislike being found out. By Monday morning, Flaxborough had resumed its ordinary rhythm, though with a faintly self-conscious air, as if the town suspected it had been caught gossiping too loudly. The high street looked its usual. Shop fronts polished, curtains twitching, but the conversations within its shops and offices carried a newly cautious tone, marked by the occasional glance toward the police station's brick facade. People were beginning to wonder whether Mr. Pemble's passing, so decorously handled, might yet prove indecorous upon closer inspection. At the Building Society, the blinds were half drawn against the sun. A small brass sign on the door read, "Open as usual," though inside, the staff moved with the uncertain solemnity of mourners rehearsing grief. The counter clerks whispered in undertones, while in the manager's office, Mr. Harby had taken up residence behind a desk polished to the color of old treacle. He was a large man whose bulk seemed to consist more of self-importance than substance. His tie, though properly knotted, bulged at the neck like an ill-concealed secret. When Sergeant Mally introduced himself and produced his warrant card, Harby's face arranged itself into what he evidently believed was the expression of civic cooperation. Yes, dreadful business, he began at once, waving Mally toward a chair that appeared never to have been sat in. Arthur Pemble, most conscientious fellow, a sad loss to the society. I've been manager here for 11 years, Sergeant, and I can tell you there wasn't a more reliable clerk in the county. Mally, whose penmanship improved only when nervous, produced a small notebook. Reliable, was he? Didn't have any disagreements with anyone. Financial irregularities, perhaps. Harby drew back, his eyebrows climbing in theatrical offense. Irregularities. Good heavens, no. We are a respectable institution, Sergeant. Our accounts are beyond reproach. Why, only last quarter we received commendation from the auditors. No, Mr. Pemble was a stickler for accuracy. Overly so, if I'm honest. Spent too much time balancing columns no one else would have noticed out of line. Seems thorough, said Mally, scribbling. And did he mention being unwell lately? The manager hesitated, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief that smelled faintly of furniture polish. Not to me, though he did take more tea breaks these past weeks. Said he felt light-headed at times, but he refused to see a doctor. Claimed it was nothing a good night's sleep wouldn't mend. Mally closed his notebook. Right, thank you. That'll do for now. As he left, Harby called after him too quickly. You'll tell the inspector there's no reason to pry into our records, won't you? We've nothing to hide. Mally's polite smile did not quite reach his eyes. Of course, sir. Just routine. Back at the station, Purbright listened with half-closed eyes as Mally relayed the conversation. The inspector's pipe rested unlit in his hand, his fingers tracing the stem as if testing a theory. Nothing to hide, you say? Purbright repeated, an oddly defensive assurance, considering no one had yet accused him of concealment. Mally grinned faintly. Bit jumpy, that one. Kept rubbing his desk with his sleeve. A man who polishes while talking, murmured Purbright, is either nervous or vain, sometimes both. Did you notice any mention of what this new arrangement might have been, the one Miss Pemble spoke of? No, sir. He acted like he'd never heard of it. Purbright rose, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. Then we may assume he had. People rarely deny knowledge of what they find irrelevant. He crossed to the window, watching a tradesman wheel a barrow of wilted cherry branches down the street. The blossoms were nearly gone now, their beauty dispersed like the town's sympathy, lavish while fresh, forgotten by Monday. Mally, he said, turning back, we'll have a look at Mr. Pemble's desk. The building society will hardly refuse when asked politely. The office, after closing time, had the peculiar silence of a room designed for money, hushed, faintly self-important. The ledgers lay stacked like tombstones, their spines labelled in careful ink. Purbright examined Pemble's desk, which sat near a window overlooking the market square. The drawers were immaculate, rows of pencils, neatly folded blotting paper, and one photograph of Miss Pemble taken, it seemed, some years ago when she smiled more easily. Yet in the lowest drawer, beneath a sheaf of cancelled cheques, Purbright found something less tidy, a small envelope marked only with the initials H.F. He held it up to the light. Inside were 2 slips of paper, one a memorandum concerning an account adjustment, the other a note in a woman's hand, round, careful, and faintly scented with talcum powder. It read, Tuesday after 4. Best if you come by the back gate. Purbright replaced the papers precisely as found and closed the drawer. Mally, he said softly, you recall what Miss Pemble said about her brother being cheerful of late. Perhaps he had reason, one more human than financial. You think he was seeing someone, sir? Perhaps. Or meeting someone about money. Both tend to involve secrecy. As they left, the caretaker, an elderly man with the apologetic stoop of long service, appeared at the door. Everything all right, gentlemen? He asked. Quite, said Purbright. Tell me, Mr. Rudge, sir. Ah, Mr. Rudge. Did Mr. Pemble often stay late? Most nights, sir. Said he liked to tidy figures before they tidied him. Last week, though, he had visitors. Quiet ones. Used the side entrance. I didn't like to pry. Visitors? Purbright's tone was mild, almost conversational. Men or women? Both, sir. First a lady, older, well-dressed, then another time that Harby fellow himself, left looking sour. Purbright nodded, satisfied, and thanked the man. When they stepped outside, the evening air smelled faintly of rain and damp brick. The inspector paused by the curb, gazing back at the darkened windows of the building society. "Two visitors," he murmured. "A lady with a back gate and a manager with something to hide. Between them, our Mr. Pemble seems to have balanced more than one set of accounts." Mally frowned. "So which do you reckon killed him, sir? The lady or the ledger?" Purbright smiled faintly. "Neither, Sergeant, at least not alone. But if Flaxborough gossip is correct, we may expect the truth to bloom again, like those cherry trees, once the petals have fallen and the branches are bare." The rain began in the early hours of Tuesday, light and steady, like someone gently testing the strength of the town's roof tiles. By breakfast, it had settled into a soft drizzle, dimming the shop windows and giving the streets of Flaxborough their usual, washed-out respectability. Inspector Purbright regarded it as a useful sort of weather. It slowed people down, softened tempers, and made even the guilty appear merely damp. At precisely 10 o'clock, a telephone call arrived at the station. Constable Teal, who had yet to master the art of calm conversation, announced it with unnecessary excitement. "Message from Miss Pemble, sir. She says someone's been in her garden during the night." Purbright lifted his gaze from the report he was annotating. A modest document concerning street signage that had momentarily held his attention more than any corpse. "In her garden, you say? And what did this nocturnal botanist achieve?" "Says the greenhouse door was left open," Teal replied, shuffling. "A flower pot broken. She found footprints too. Men's shoes, she thinks." "Indeed," Purbright murmured. "Miss Pemble strikes me as a woman unlikely to confuse shoes." He rose, adjusted his coat, and motioned for Malay. "Come along, Sergeant. Let us inspect the horticultural crime scene." Brookfield Avenue was gloomier under the drizzle, its residents peering from lace-curtained windows as the police car pulled up. Miss Pemble stood waiting at her gate, umbrella upright, her face set in that combination of composure and indignation peculiar to people whose privacy has been violated, but whose neighbors must not know. "This way, Inspector," she said briskly, leading them through the side path. "I found it just after 7. The door was swinging. Arthur always kept it bolted. Well, I did after he passed. It seemed improper otherwise." Purbright inclined his head. "Quite. May we?" The greenhouse, a modest structure of green-painted wood and clouded panes, smelled strongly of damp soil and carnations. On the floor lay a broken pot, its soil spread in a dark fan. Nearby, the footprint of a man's shoe pressed deep into the mud. Neat, narrow, and recent. Mally crouched beside it. Size 8, maybe 9. Not much tread. Office sort of shoe. Purbright looked around, noting the careful order of the plants, each labeled in Miss Pemble's hand. "Nothing taken?" "Not that I can see," she replied. "Though that window latch, Arthur always said it didn't catch properly. Someone could have slipped in that way." The inspector bent slightly, running a finger along the sill. "A recent mark," he murmured. "Polish from a sleeve, perhaps. Someone cautious or sentimental." Miss Pemble frowned. "Sentimental?" Purbright gave a mild smile. "People who revisit the scenes of their associations often are. They seek reassurance or perhaps removal." He straightened. "Miss Pemble, did your brother keep any personal papers in the house? Letters, perhaps?" She hesitated. Not out of deceit, but deliberation. "There were some in his desk upstairs. I've not touched them. It didn't seem respectful." "I quite understand," Purbright said. "May I impose upon your respect just a little?" She led them inside, the air of the house still faintly scented with floor polish and yesterday's tea. The writing desk stood by the window of the front parlour, its surface dustless, the key still in place. When Purbright opened the top drawer, the same neatness confronted him. Envelopes stacked by size, a fountain pen wiped clean, blotter unused. but in the side compartment, a small gap in the dust betrayed something recently removed. "Miss Pemble," he said quietly, "did you take anything from here?" "No," she said, alarmed. "Only dusted around it. Why?" He tapped the faint rectangle in the wood. "There was an object here, a book or a small ledger. Gone now." Mally leaned closer. "You think the intruder came for that?" Purbright's tone remained mild. "It seems likelier than a passion for geraniums." They left Miss Pemble with reassurances and returned to the station, the drizzle thickening into honest rain. On the way, Purbright said little. Mally, who found silence intolerable unless it came from suspects, finally ventured, "Could be Harby, sir. Maybe that new arrangement wasn't exactly above board. If Pemble had proof—" "Possibly," said Purbright, "though burglary is a crude way to tidy accounts. I should prefer to believe in subtler arithmetic." Back at his desk, Purbright took out the note found in Pemble's drawer, the one marked HF, and studied it again. "Tuesday, after 4. He turned to Mally. "Do we know any women with those initials?" "Locally respectable ones, preferably." Mally pondered. "Mrs. Hollis Fenn, sir. Lives near the library. Widow. Runs the Civic Beautification Committee. The ones who painted the post boxes pink last year." "Ah, yes," said Purbright dryly. "The committee that turned patriotism into embroidery. Make discreet inquiries, Sergeant. Ask if Mrs. Hollis Fenn is acquainted with the late Mr. Pemble, or if she has a back gate in need of explanation." By the afternoon, Mally returned, somewhat flushed from the politeness of his errand. "She knows him, sir. Said they'd met through the committee. He kept the society's small accounts. Donations and such." She didn't seem upset exactly. Just said he was a man of dependable habits. Purbright raised an eyebrow. "Few epitaphs chill me more? And the back gate?" "She's got one, sir. Leads to an alley behind her garden." Purbright nodded slowly. Then at 4 o'clock on some Tuesday, our dependable Mr. Pemble visited her by the discreet entrance. A woman of refinement, a man of figures, and a missing ledger. "Mally, if we are very fortunate, the truth will not be half so sordid as it sounds." Outside, the rain eased. Flaxborough's chimneys sent up thin threads of smoke, their owners preparing for tea. Purbright leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly. Somewhere between a dead clerk, a nervous treasurer, and a careful widow lay the motive that stitched them together. The town might whisper, the rain might fall, but Purbright knew Flaxborough too well to mistake coincidence for comfort. The following morning brought with it a washed clarity, the kind that made Flaxborough's streets appear both refreshed and slightly embarrassed for having been caught under the previous day's rain. The sky, a cautious grey, hung low enough to make umbrellas seem half practical, half symbolic. Inspector Purbright arrived at the station precisely at 9, his umbrella dripping politely into the stand, and found Sergeant Mally waiting with what could only be described as a mixture of triumph and confusion. "Morning, sir," Mally began, straightening a little too quickly. "You'll want to hear this. Mrs. Hollis Fenn's maid came to the station not half an hour ago. Said her mistress had a visitor last night, Mr. Harby." Purbright, halfway through unbuttoning his coat, paused. "Mr. Harby? Of the building society?" "The same, sir. Arrived after 8, left before 9. Maid says they were arguing, but she couldn't make out the words. Just a lot of pacing and a few raised voices. Then, when he left, Mrs. Hollis Fenn locked herself in her sitting room and told the maid she'd be unavailable for callers." Purbright hung up his coat thoughtfully. "Curious timing. Yesterday she told you she'd barely known the man's name." "Exactly, sir. I'd say she's got more to do with Pemble's affairs than she's letting on." Purbright smiled faintly. "Sergeant, in Flaxborough, few people let on anything they actually mean. It's a kind of civic sport." He glanced toward the window. "I think it's time Mrs. Hollis Fenn invited us for tea." By late morning, they stood before the widow's primly maintained townhouse on Grove Crescent. Its curtains, immaculate and identical, suggested an inhabitant determined to appear tasteful without surrendering to comfort. When the door opened, Mrs. Hollis Fenn herself emerged from behind it like a figure reluctantly unveiled. "Inspector Purbright," she said, with a voice both careful and smooth. "And Sergeant Malley, was it? I was told you wished to speak further. I do hope it's not inconvenient." "Not at all," Purbright replied mildly. "Inconvenience is the backbone of investigation." She ushered them into a drawing room so perfectly arranged that one almost feared to breathe near the china. The tea tray was already prepared, which struck Purbright as a small but significant detail. One does not boil a kettle for men one expects to avoid. "I understand," he began, accepting a cup, "that you are acquainted with the late Mr. Pemble through civic work." Her expression was a study in composure. "A very modest acquaintance. He managed certain donations. We discussed them occasionally. He was a man of precision, though perhaps a little too thorough." "Indeed," said Purbright. "Thoroughness can be exhausting. And did you find him trustworthy?" "Entirely, if anything, too much so. He lacked the flexibility required of those who handle community funds. He saw errors where none existed." Purbright stirred his tea slowly, his tone almost casual. "And yet one of those errors might have prompted a discussion between you and him, recently. Say, last Tuesday, after 4 o'clock. Her spoon halted. The faintest tremor crossed her eyelids. "Ah, you've found the note, I suppose?" "I should have destroyed it. It was nothing improper, Inspector. He came to deliver papers, a list of donations requiring audit. I prefer discretion in such matters. It would not do for people to imagine I had to summon clerks to my home like tradesmen." Purbright nodded. "Quite so. And last night's visitor, Mr. Harby, was he also delivering papers?" The question was gentle, almost kind, but it landed like a stone in still water. Mrs. Hollis Fenn set down her cup with care. "You seem to be well informed, Inspector. Mr. Harby did call. He wished to discuss the Society's public accounts before Thursday's council meeting. He was agitated. The weather, perhaps." Purbright's gaze held hers. "And did he mention Mr. Pemble?" For a moment she hesitated, as though calculating whether denial would sound too quick. "He said only that Mr. Pemble's passing had been unfortunate, and that he had left certain matters unfinished. I gathered he wanted to ensure there would be no confusion." "Ah," said Purbright, setting his cup down gently. "Confusion? The mother of opportunity." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Inspector, I do hope you're not implying—" "Nothing at all," he interrupted pleasantly. "We're merely trying to bring a little clarity to confusion's family tree. Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Hollis Fenn. I believe that will do for now." As they stepped out into the brightening air, Malley exhaled in relief. "She's hiding something, sir. You could see it. She went pale at the mention of that note." "Yes," Purbright said softly. "A woman of order dislikes reminders of disorder. Still, I think she's less afraid of what we know than of what Harby knows." "Then you reckon they were both in on it?" "Possibly, but there's another possibility. Harby may have thought Pemble was in league with her against him, or perhaps the reverse. Each suspects the other, and both fear discovery. It's a small town, Sergeant. Intrigue travels in pairs." That afternoon, Purbright requested the Building Society's ledgers from the last quarter. After a polite delay and a few murmured objections, they arrived, stacked neatly on his desk. By evening, the inspector had gone through 3 volumes and half a packet of tea biscuits. His expression had not altered once, though Malley could sense the steady tightening of thought behind it. "Anything, sir?" Malley ventured at last. Purbright closed one of the books and tapped it lightly. A series of adjustments to donation accounts. Minor sums, small enough to avoid scrutiny, each signed by both Harby and Pemble. Yet the balances appear corrected later, in handwriting not matching either man's, and all of them tied to one committee, the Civic Beautification Fund, the one Mrs. Hollis Fenn runs. Precisely. A tidy loop of trust and misdirection. Money that vanishes, then reappears where no one would think to look. The only untidy element is Mr. Pemble, a man too honest to let numbers misbehave. Mally frowned. So if he found out, he may have confronted them. Perhaps privately, perhaps even politely. But politeness can be deadly when it corners a liar. Outside, the lamps had begun to glow against the dusk. Purbright leaned back, watching their reflections stretch across the glass. "Tomorrow," he said, almost to himself, "we'll see which of our two civic benefactors blinks first, and whether Arthur Pemble's heart truly failed, or was helped to do so by an excess of good manners." The next morning found Flaxborough in one of those half-hearted fogs that seemed reluctant to commit to either mystery or drizzle. It hung in doorways and along hedgerows, softening the edges of things until even the lamp-posts looked undecided. Inspector Purbright, however, appeared to find it invigorating. He arrived at the station at 8:30 with the faintest trace of amusement behind his calm expression and a folded copy of the Flaxborough Chronicle tucked beneath his arm. "They've printed a statement from the mayor," he told Mally, placing the paper on the desk, "a tribute to the late Mr. Pemble's dedication to civic harmony and the honest handling of figures. It would be touching, if not quite premature." Mally looked puzzled. "Premature, sir? In Flaxborough, Sergeant, the dead are usually declared honest only after we've finished checking." He reached for his coat. "Come along. We'll pay another visit to our Mr. Harby. He strikes me as the kind of man who polishes his conscience the same way he polishes his desk. Regularly, but without ever removing the stains." The building society was already open, though the air inside felt staler than it had 2 days before, as if the room itself held its breath. Harby was in his office, seated rigidly behind that same glossy expanse of wood. His face this morning was greyish at the edges, and his usual bluster had the thinness of a man rehearsing confidence. "Inspector," he said with a strained smile, "to what do I owe the pleasure? Surely there's been no further tragedy." "None that I know of," said Purbright, seating himself without invitation. "We've been reviewing some of the society's ledgers. Fascinating reading. I hadn't realized municipal beautification required quite such creative bookkeeping." Harby's hand jerked slightly toward the papers on his desk. I don't know what you mean. Our accounts are perfectly clear." "Clear," said Purbright, "in the way a pond is clear after a storm. Everything visible, but not necessarily where it belongs." Harby swallowed. "If this is about the Civic Fund, I assure you any discrepancies were purely clerical. The late Mr. Pemble was rather too particular. He corrected matters that didn't require correction." "Indeed," said Purbright, leaning back. "And when he insisted on further examination, you discouraged him?" "Certainly not. We simply disagreed on procedure." Purbright's tone remained conversational. "And did this disagreement continue until last Saturday morning?" Harby blinked. "Saturday? Why, no. We hadn't spoken since Wednesday." "Curious," murmured Purbright, "because several witnesses recall seeing you near the Petal parade route before noon, the same parade where Mr. Pemble's heart so inconveniently failed." Colour crept into Harby's cheeks. "I was merely passing through on my way to the town hall. Everyone was there." "Quite so," Purbright said, rising. "Flaxborough is not a town that misses a parade or a scandal. If you'll excuse me, I think we've kept you from your balancing long enough." As they stepped outside, Mally muttered, "He's sweating like a ham under glass, sir." "You think he did it?" Purbright walked slowly down the steps. "No, Sergeant. He's afraid, but not guilty, at least not of murder. His fear smells of discovery, not conscience. The distinction is worth noting." By noon they were back at the station. A message awaited Purbright. Miss Pemble wished to see him about a matter of urgency. She arrived not long after, clutching a small brown envelope and looking unusually pale. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she began, sitting primly on the edge of her chair. "But I found this among Arthur's gardening books this morning. It must have been misplaced." Purbright took the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded sheet of notepaper bearing her brother's precise, upright handwriting. "If anything happens to me, look to the Civic Fund accounts. Harby's signature is on them, but not his doing alone. Someone else has used his hand as cover. Tell the police only if they ask." Purbright read it twice, then looked up. "Thank you, Miss Pemble. This was sealed when you found it?" "Yes, I think he meant it for me in case—" She faltered, then straightened. Arthur wasn't the sort to imagine danger, Inspector. What could he have meant by someone else? Purbright considered the letter. "Your brother was a man of clarity, Miss Pemble. If he wrote this, he suspected more than mere incompetence. I should like to keep it for the record." She nodded, visibly relieved to be rid of the burden. When she had gone, Purbright remained at the window for some moments, turning the letter between his fingers as though feeling the weight of its understatement. "Sergeant," he said finally, "I think we shall pay Mrs. Hollis Fenn another courtesy call. Bring a copy of the note, if you please." The widow received them with less grace this time. Her usual poise was frayed, her smile tight. "More questions, Inspector? I assure you I've already told you all I know." "I don't doubt it," Purbright said amiably. "Still, small details sometimes slip the mind. For instance, how well you knew Mr. Harby." She stiffened. "I told you, we served together on the committee." "Of course. Yet he seems to have served you rather more faithfully than the town. These accounts, for example." He held out a copy of Pemble's note. Familiar handwriting, perhaps? Her hand flew to her throat. Who gave you that?" "Your late clerk, by way of his sister," Purbright replied softly. "He seems to have believed the Civic Fund was being used for purposes other than floral arrangements." Her silence stretched until it cracked. "It wasn't meant to harm anyone," she said finally, her voice brittle. "Arthur discovered the transfers. Small ones. He threatened to expose them. I begged him not to. It would have ruined the society, the council, everyone. He promised to think about it, but I knew he wouldn't keep quiet." "And so?" Purbright's tone remained gentle. She looked up, eyes glistening. "I went to his house that night. I only meant to reason with him. He grew angry, said he'd go to the mayor in the morning. He'd been drinking brandy, I think. I left him sitting there, pale and trembling. When I heard he'd died, I thought, perhaps it was the shock. I never meant—" Purbright nodded slowly. "I believe you. But you see, Mrs. Hollis Fenn, guilt in Flaxborough is rarely measured by intent. It's measured by what people cannot bring themselves to admit." She began to cry softly into her gloved hands. Purbright waited, his expression unreadable, then said quietly to Malley, "Fetch the car, Sergeant. I imagine we'll need a word with the coroner before evening." Outside, the fog had thickened again, wrapping the street in a soft, deceptive calm. Purbright glanced back at the shuttered windows of the widow's house. "There's something still missing, Malley," he said quietly. "Her confession fits the tragedy, but not the footprints in Miss Pemble's garden. No, someone else has been tending to the weeds." Evening settled over Flaxborough with a kind of hesitant quiet that follows a public embarrassment. The mist of the morning had lifted, leaving the streets bare and damp, the lamps glinting on puddles like small guilty secrets. Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Malley drove back from the coroner's office in companionable silence, the kind that filled the car when thoughts had grown too complicated for speech. It had been a long day of careful documentation. Mrs. Hollis Fenn's tearful confession was now committed to paper, though Purbright had worded it delicately, omitting certain emotional embellishments that might trouble the magistrate later. Yet even as he dictated it, a stubborn unease had persisted in him. The widow's story was neat, perhaps too neat, and Flaxborough rarely produced neatness without cost. Mally broke the silence first. "You don't believe her, sir?" "Not entirely." Purbright's gaze remained on the mist-blurred headlights ahead. "I believe she believes herself. That's not the same thing." "You mean she didn't kill him?" "I mean," Purbright replied, "that she may have caused his death in a way less direct but no less deliberate. Guilt takes many disguises, Sergeant, and sometimes it borrows another man's shoes." Mally frowned. "Shoes, sir? The ones that left prints in Miss Pemble's garden. You recall? Narrow, office sort of soles. Hardly the footwear of a woman sneaking about in the dark." The sergeant's eyes widened. "You think Harby went there?" "I think someone did," said Purbright. "Someone who wanted something from that house. Something small enough to fit into a pocket and important enough to risk the damp." They drove on in silence, the tires whispering on the wet road. When they reached the station, Purbright went straight to his office and began sorting through the files again, as though the missing piece might have slipped in between the papers while he wasn't looking. At 9:30, the telephone rang. Constable Teal's uncertain voice crackled down the line. "Sir, it's the night watchman from the railway depot. He's just reported a break-in. Says a man was prowling near the freight office. Ran off when challenged, but he dropped something." Purbright's eyes brightened slightly. "Dropped what?" "An envelope, sir, addressed to Mrs. Hollis Fenn." The inspector replaced the receiver and reached for his hat. "Sergeant, it appears our civic benefactors are not yet finished corresponding." They arrived at the depot 15 minutes later. The air smelled of oil, damp wood, and faintly of soot. The watchman, a red-nosed man with a flashlight that trembled as much as he did, led them to the spot near the siding. "He came from that direction, sir," he said. "I shouted, and he bolted. Slim chap, wore a dark coat. Didn't see his face, but he ran like a man who knew where he was going." Purbright examined the ground. The gravel was disturbed, and a scrap of torn paper clung to the fence. Mally retrieved the dropped envelope from the watchman's hands and held it under the light. It was smeared with mud, the flap unsealed. Inside were 3 receipts, building society documents, each bearing Harby's signature and dated 3 weeks earlier. Purbright studied them for a long moment. "Ah," he murmured. "The missing entries." "What's he doing with these?" asked Mally. "Attempting to vanish them, I imagine, or trade them if he's clever. These are the records that connect him to Mrs. Hollis Fenn's little diversions." He straightened. "We'll pay him a visit. Though at this hour, I suspect he's already taken the trouble to be elsewhere." They found the manager's house dark, but for a single lamp in the front room. Harby opened the door at Purbright's knock, his shirt collar undone, a decanter within easy reach on the sideboard. His attempt at composure barely survived the sight of the 2 men. "Inspector, Sergeant, you've come late." "Duty is unromantic that way," Purbright said mildly. "I'm afraid we must intrude upon your evening." Harby tried a smile, failed and gestured them inside. The air smelled faintly of brandy and nervousness. "I've had word," Purbright began, "that someone matching your build was seen at the railway depot not an hour ago. Do you happen to have an alibi, or shall we rely upon the decanter?" Harby's voice faltered. Why would I be at the depot?" "To dispose of evidence, perhaps. We found an envelope addressed to Mrs. Hollis Fenn. Inside were receipts with your signature. You remember them, I trust." The color drained from his face. She promised to destroy them. I only wanted—" "Ah," Purbright interrupted gently. "So you were there." Harby sagged into the nearest chair. "I didn't kill him," he said hoarsely. "Good God, I never laid a hand on him. Arthur came to me about the money. Said he'd found the withdrawals. I told him to leave it, to let me fix it quietly. But he went to her instead. And then he died, and she panicked. She said she'd tell the police if I didn't take the blame for the figures. She frightened me, Inspector. She's capable of anything." Purbright regarded him with faint pity. "A man terrified of a lady's opinion is not unusual in Flaxborough, but I doubt Mrs. Hollis Fenn chased you through the depot tonight." Harby's hands trembled as he reached for the brandy. "I was only trying to get the papers back before you found them. If she thought I'd talk, she might do something foolish." "Foolishness," Purbright murmured, "is the most reliable currency in this town." He rose. "You'll remain available for questioning, of course. I imagine we'll have more to discuss tomorrow." As they left, Mally muttered, "He's finished, sir. Between her confession and those papers, we've got the pair of them." Purbright did not answer at once. The night had turned colder, the fog returning in lazy swirls across the pavement. At last he said quietly, "Perhaps. Yet I keep thinking of Mr. Pemble's last hours, alone in that small house, writing warnings no one was meant to read. He was frightened too, Sergeant, but not of either of them. He wrote as if danger were already inside his own walls." Mally blinked. "You mean the footprints again?" "Yes," said Purbright, his tone distant. "And something else. Someone in that house knew where to look for his papers. Someone who didn't need to force the lock." He turned toward the car, his eyes narrowing in thought. "We'll call on Miss Pemble in the morning. I've an idea she's been tidying rather more than her brother's memory." Morning returned to Flaxborough in the most modest of fashions. A low light through gauze grey clouds, the distant clatter of a milk float, and a church bell that seemed reluctant to sound cheerful. Inspector Purbright stood by the window of his office, his tea cooling beside him, and watched the drizzle hesitate over the marketplace as though deciding whether it was worth the trouble. Behind him, Sergeant Mally shuffled through his notes, the paper crackling with uncertainty. "Harby hasn't left his house, sir," Mally reported. "Constable Teal's keeping an eye from the corner. Seems the man hasn't the stomach to run." Purbright nodded absently. "A coward's advantage, that. He'll sit tight until someone tells him which way guilt is leaning. It's the Flaxborough method of moral navigation." He turned from the window. "And Miss Pemble? Have we word from her?" "Not yet, sir. I sent a note saying you'd like to call round this morning. She said she'd be in." Purbright took his hat from the stand, balancing it with mild deliberation. "Then let's not keep her waiting. Women who keep neat houses dislike uncertainty. It clutters the mind." Brookfield Avenue looked as prim as ever, though its orderliness felt newly artificial, as if the hedges and window boxes were making a show of indifference. Miss Pemble answered the door, with that brittle calm of someone determined to appear helpful. "Inspector, Sergeant, you must excuse the mess. I've been tidying my brother's papers again." "Again?" Purbright asked lightly, stepping inside. "I thought you'd finished with those." "Oh, just a few letters. I thought I might as well put them in order for my own peace of mind." She gestured toward the parlour, where the same neat writing desk stood by the window. The faint scent of lavender polish lingered, though Purbright detected another, less domestic trace. Old tobacco, recently disturbed. "You didn't smoke, Miss Pemble?" "Good heavens, no. Arthur did occasionally, but not for months before he died." Purbright looked toward the fireplace. The small tray there held a pipe and matches, both wiped clean. He ran a finger along the rim of the tray. "Curious," he murmured, "how memory resists dusting." She watched him with a composed expression, but her hands, clasped at her waist, were pale and still. "I've told you all I can, Inspector. Have you found out what truly happened to my brother?" "Nearly," Purbright said, "but there are small things that puzzle me. That night when someone came into your garden, for instance. The footprint was quite distinct, a man's shoe, size 8 or thereabouts, but it didn't lead to the greenhouse door. It began there, as if the intruder stepped out, not in." She blinked. "That's impossible. Who would be leaving my garden at that hour?" That is what I've been asking myself, said Purbright mildly. There was no sign of forced entry, no damage to the latch. Whoever moved about that night had the key, or the right not to need one. Miss Pemble said nothing, but her stillness grew heavier, as though each word added a layer to some hidden weight. Purbright crossed the room to the desk and opened the top drawer. When I was last here, a book was missing, a small ledger. Would you know what became of it? Her voice was almost steady. Arthur kept so many small notebooks, Inspector. Perhaps one of them's been mislaid. Mislaid, Purbright repeated. A flexible word. The same word Mrs. Hollis Fenn used about her donation accounts. He turned, meeting her eyes. I believe your brother left that ledger hidden here, because he suspected the danger came from closer quarters than his colleagues. Miss Pemble's composure faltered for the first time. From me? From someone with access? Yes, someone who could take it before we did. She sank into the nearest chair, the faintest tremor in her breath. You think I had something to do with his death? Arthur was my brother. Purbright's tone was gentle, but implacable. Yes, a brother you depended on, financially and otherwise. And perhaps, in his way, he depended on you until he became an obstacle. Her eyes flashed then, not with outrage but exhaustion. You don't understand. He wasn't the saint people thought. He kept everyone's secrets, Harby's, hers, even mine. And he enjoyed it. He liked to remind me how generous he'd been, how everything in this house was his doing. I asked him to let me handle some of the household money, but he laughed, said I couldn't add up without crying. Mally shifted awkwardly, but Purbright remained still. So when he found the irregularities, he might have blamed you. Her voice fell to a whisper. He did. He said I'd signed one of the receipts wrong. Said it made it look like I'd drawn the funds myself. He meant to report it, Inspector. To ruin me, just to prove his point. I went to him that evening to beg him not to. He was drinking, angry. She stopped, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth. You argued? Purbright prompted quietly. Yes. He said he'd never protect me again. I didn't mean to hurt him. I only wanted him to listen. He stood up, his face went white, and he fell. Just fell. The brandy, said Purbright softly. You poured it, perhaps? She nodded, tears slipping soundlessly. A little sleeping powder. Mine. I only wanted him calm. He had such a temper. I never thought it would stop his heart. There was a long silence. The clock ticked with painful precision. Purbright sighed faintly, his expression unreadable but not unkind. It's a curious thing, Miss Pemble. In Flaxborough, people seldom kill for gain. They do it for quiet, to stop someone talking, to make things tidy again. She looked up, eyes glistening with a strange relief. It's true. I wanted quiet, just quiet. When they left the house, the drizzle had begun again, soft as breath on glass. Mally walked beside his superior in thoughtful silence before saying, So that's it then, sir. All three of them guilty in their own way. Each performing their part, said Purbright. Mrs. Hollis Fenn for vanity, Harby for fear, and Miss Pemble for peace. He paused at the corner, glancing back toward the narrow house with its drawn curtains. Flaxborough has its own moral arithmetic, Sergeant. The sums rarely balance, but the ledgers always look clean. He buttoned his coat and turned toward the station. Come along. There'll be paperwork to file before lunch, and I dare say Miss Teal will have overboiled the tea again. Death may stir the town, but bureaucracy always settles it. The confession, when written out and signed in Miss Pemble's small, neat hand, occupied barely 2 pages. Purbright, ever the craftsman of understatement, worded it without flourish. There was no mention of malice or desperation, only the slow, accidental convergence of fear and fatigue. By the time she had finished reading it aloud, the lines of tension around her mouth had softened, as though articulating guilt had finally allowed her to breathe. She did not weep. Instead, she folded, her hands on the table, looked up at the inspector and said in her calm, schoolmistress voice, "Will they print it in the paper?" Purbright regarded her thoughtfully. "I imagine they'll print something, but not this. The Chronicle prefers its tragedies tidier and its morals more certain. We shall spare them the details of powder and brotherly correction." "Thank you," she said simply, as though relieved by his matter-of-fact tone. Arthur would have hated scandal. "Yes," Purbright murmured. "He seems to have been devoted to avoiding it, even while creating it." When she had been escorted out, quietly, without cuffs, and with a polite nod to Sergeant Malley, Purbright returned to his office. The rain had stopped, and the town was bathed in that pale, indifferent sunlight that followed English storms. Too clean, too revealing. On the desk lay 3 open files, Pemble, Hollis, Fenn, and Harby, arranged as if waiting to be reconciled. Malley entered a few minutes later with the hesitant gait of a man who suspects further work. "We'll need to confirm her statement with the chemist, sir. See if he sold her the sleeping powder." "Already done," Purbright said. "The pharmacist confirmed she'd purchased it a fortnight ago, recommended it for sleeplessness. A conscientious man. Records everything, even the dull habits of anxious spinsters." Malley nodded approvingly. "That ties it up, then. Pretty clean, all told." "Clean," Purbright repeated, glancing at the papers. "Yes, though I can't help noticing how often cleanliness in Flaxborough depends upon the timely removal of one human being or another." Malley, missing the philosophy, busied himself straightening a pile of forms. "What about Harby and the widow? Do we still charge them?" "For the accounting mischief, perhaps, but murder, no. Miss Pemble's confession clears them of that." "And besides," Purbright added dryly, "their guilt lies elsewhere, and in this town, moral infection spreads quicker through whispers than through court proceedings." "Funny, though," Malley mused. "If she hadn't said anything, we might have gone on thinking Harby or the widow did it." "Indeed. Silence is the most persuasive liar." Purbright leaned back, folding his hands. "Still, I can't quite shake the feeling that Mr. Pemble helped her in his own way. His note to his sister, 'Tell the police only if they ask.' A strange choice of phrasing, don't you think?" Malley frowned. "You think he knew she might, well, overdo it?" "Not precisely," Purbright said. "But he sensed danger near him. He was too punctilious to leave the world in chaos. Perhaps he hoped the truth, whatever it was, would eventually tidy itself. A final act of accounting." A knock at the door interrupted them. Constable Teal entered, saluting awkwardly. "Sir, there's a Mr. Wrigley from the Chronicle here. Says he wants a comment about the case." Purbright sighed. "Show him in before he invents one." Mr. Wrigley, a man whose mustache seemed permanently scented with printer's ink, bustled in with his notebook open and optimism blazing. "Inspector, heard you've got the Hollis Fenn affair wrapped up. Tremendous work. The town's been positively humming. Can we say it was a conspiracy among all 3? "You may say what you please, Mr. Wrigley," Purbright replied mildly, "though accuracy has been known to extend careers." The reporter grinned. Right. Between us, though, was there blackmail, or romance? The widow's got quite a reputation, you know." "Both are cheaper to imagine than to prove," said Purbright. "But no, I'm afraid this was a smaller story than that. No villains, just ordinary people rearranging their mistakes until one of them collapsed under the weight." Wrigley's pencil hovered uncertainly. "That's not much of a headline, Inspector." "I know," said Purbright, "but it will make an excellent footnote." When the journalist had gone, Malley looked faintly amused. "You do enjoy tormenting them, sir." "Not tormenting," Purbright corrected gently. "Educating. They prefer their morality with borders. I prefer mine blurred at the edges. The day slipped toward evening with the unhurried efficiency that characterized Flaxborough's bureaucracy. By 6 o'clock, Miss Pemble had been conveyed discreetly to the magistrate's house for a preliminary hearing. Mrs. Hollis Fenn had closed her shutters for reflection, and Mr. Harby, after signing a statement of partial culpability in the civic funds, had taken to his bed with a doctor's note declaring nervous exhaustion. As for Purbright, he remained at his desk, staring absently at the rain marks drying on the window. Beyond the glass, the town looked deceptively peaceful. The gas lamps flickering to life, the bakery's sign creaking in the wind, a stray dog crossing the cobbles with the patience of one who knows there's always a crust waiting somewhere. He lit his pipe, but did not smoke it. Instead, he murmured almost to himself. 3 people tangled in a circle of propriety and deceit, each convinced they were tidying up after the other, and the only honest man among them ends up dead under a float of papier-mâché doves. Mally, hovering by the door, hesitated. "It's strange, sir. You'd think in a place this quiet, people would have less to hide." Purbright smiled faintly. "On the contrary, Sergeant, quiet towns produce the most energetic hiders. There's no noise to drown the scratching under the floorboards." He rose then, gathering his coat. "Go home, Mally. Tell your wife that we've solved another tragedy and restored peace to Flaxborough. Just don't promise her it will last." When the door closed behind him, the room settled into its habitual silence, disturbed only by the faint ticking of the clock and the whisper of rain against glass. Outside, the cherry blossoms were nearly gone now, their petals scattered and trampled, leaving the trees bare again, clean, unburdened, and waiting for next spring's parade. The confession, when written out and signed in Miss Pemble's small, neat hand, occupied barely 2 pages. Purbright, ever the craftsman of understatement, worded it without flourish. There was no mention of malice or desperation, only the slow, accidental convergence of fear and fatigue. By the time she had finished reading it aloud, the lines of tension around her mouth had softened, as though articulating guilt had finally allowed her to breathe. She did not weep. Instead, she folded her hands on the table, looked up at the inspector, and said in her calm, schoolmistress voice, "Will they print it in the paper?" Purbright regarded her thoughtfully. "I imagine they'll print something, but not this. The Chronicle prefers its tragedies tidier and its morals more certain. We shall spare them the details of powder and brotherly correction." "Thank you," she said simply, as though relieved by his matter-of-fact tone. Arthur would have hated scandal. "Yes," Purbright murmured. "He seems to have been devoted to avoiding it, even while creating it." When she had been escorted out, quietly, without cuffs, and with a polite nod to Sergeant Mally, Purbright returned to his office. The rain had stopped, and the town was bathed in that pale, indifferent sunlight that followed English storms. Too clean, too revealing. On the desk lay 3 open files, Pemble, Hollis Fenn, and Harby, arranged as if waiting to be reconciled. Mally entered a few minutes later with the hesitant gait of a man who suspects further work. "We'll need to confirm her statement with the chemist, sir. See if he sold her the sleeping powder." "Already done," Purbright said. "The pharmacist confirmed she'd purchased it a fortnight ago. Recommended it for sleeplessness. A conscientious man. Records everything, even the dull habits of anxious spinsters." Mally nodded approvingly. "That ties it up, then. Pretty clean, all told." "Clean," Purbright repeated, glancing at the papers. "Yes, though I can't help noticing how often cleanliness in Flaxborough depends upon the timely removal of one human being or another." Mally, missing the philosophy, busied himself straightening a pile of forms. "What about Harby and the widow? Do we still charge them?" "For the accounting mischief, perhaps, but murder? No, Miss Pemble's confession clears them of that. And besides," Purbright added dryly, "their guilt lies elsewhere, and in this town, moral infection spreads quicker through whispers than through court proceedings." Funny, though, Mally mused. If she hadn't said anything, we might have gone on thinking Harby or the widow did it. Indeed, silence is the most persuasive liar. Purbright leaned back, folding his hands. Still, I can't quite shake the feeling that Mr. Pemble helped her in his own way. His note to his sister, "Tell the police only if they ask." A strange choice of phrasing, don't you think? Mally frowned. You think he knew she might, overdo it? Not precisely, Purbright said, but he sensed danger near him. He was too punctilious to leave the world in chaos. Perhaps he hoped the truth, whatever it was, would eventually tidy itself. A final act of accounting. A knock at the door interrupted them. Constable Teal entered, saluting awkwardly. "Sir, there's a Mr. Wrigley from the Chronicle here. Says he wants a comment about the case." Purbright sighed. "Show him in before he invents one." Mr. Wrigley, a man whose mustache seemed permanently scented with printer's ink, bustled in with his notebook open and optimism blazing. "Inspector, heard you've got the Hollis Fen affair wrapped up. Tremendous work. The town's been positively humming. Can we say it was a conspiracy among all three?" "You may say what you please, Mr. Wrigley," Purbright replied mildly, though accuracy has been known to extend careers. The reporter grinned. Right. Between us, though, was there blackmail or romance? The widow's got quite a reputation, you know." "Both are cheaper to imagine than to prove," said Purbright. "But no, I'm afraid this was a smaller story than that. No villains, just ordinary people rearranging their mistakes until one of them collapsed under the weight." Wrigley's pencil hovered uncertainly. "That's not much of a headline, Inspector." "I know," said Purbright, "but it will make an excellent footnote." When the journalist had gone, Mally looked faintly amused. "You do enjoy tormenting them, sir." "Not tormenting," Purbright corrected gently. "Educating. They prefer their morality with borders. I prefer mine blurred at the edges." The day slipped toward evening with the unhurried efficiency that characterized Flaxborough's bureaucracy. By 6 o'clock, Miss Pemble had been conveyed discreetly to the magistrate's house for a preliminary hearing. Mrs. Hollis Fen had closed her shutters for reflection, and Mr. Harby, after signing a statement of partial culpability in the civic funds, had taken to his bed with a doctor's note declaring nervous exhaustion. As for Purbright, he remained at his desk, staring absently at the rain marks drying on the window. Beyond the glass, the town looked deceptively peaceful, the gas lamps flickering to life, the bakery's sign creaking in the wind, a stray dog crossing the cobbles with the patience of one who knows there's always a crust waiting somewhere. He lit his pipe but did not smoke it. Instead, he murmured almost to himself. 3 people tangled in a circle of propriety and deceit, each convinced they were tidying up after the other, and the only honest man among them ends up dead under a float of papier-mâché doves. Mally, hovering by the door, hesitated. "It's strange, sir. You'd think in a place this quiet, people would have less to hide." Purbright smiled faintly. "On the contrary, Sergeant. Quiet towns produce the most energetic hiders. There's no noise to drown the scratching under the floorboards." He rose then, gathering his coat. "Go home, Mally. Tell your wife that we've solved another tragedy and restored peace to Flaxborough. Just don't promise her it will last." When the door closed behind him, the room settled into its habitual silence, disturbed only by the faint ticking of the clock and the whisper of rain against glass. Outside, the cherry blossoms were nearly gone now, their petals scattered and trampled, leaving the trees bare again, clean, unburdened, and waiting for next spring's parade. The following day dawned with that self-conscious brightness peculiar to English towns after scandal, sunlight that seemed less a gift than an apology. Flaxborough had resumed its modest rhythm, its residents moving with a wary cheer, as though anxious to prove that they, at least, had nothing to hide. The window boxes had been rewatered, the market square was already dotted with bicycles, and the Chronicle had replaced talk of domestic tragedy with an article about the upcoming flower show. The town had turned a page, as it always did, quietly and with careful hands. Inspector Purbright sat in his office, a cup of cooling tea beside the morning's paperwork. The Pemble file lay closed at last, its spine already gathering dust. He had signed the final report the previous night, yet even now he found himself glancing toward it occasionally, not from doubt, but from a kind of reflective fondness. Some cases, he thought, did not end so much as fade, like perfume in a tidy room, or guilt politely buried beneath fresh soil. Sergeant Malley entered without knocking, a habit Purbright tolerated as one might tolerate an earnest but clumsy relative. "Morning, sir. The magistrate's clock just rang. Miss Pemble's been moved to the infirmary wing. Doctor says she's in no danger, but she's taken the news of Harby's confession rather hard." Purbright nodded slowly. Guilt shared is never lighter, only redistributed. I imagine she'd have preferred her martyrdom unchallenged. "Harby's in worse shape," Malley went on. "Solicitor says he's agreed to plead guilty to manslaughter. The widow's keeping quiet. Left town this morning for health reasons. Likely we won't see her again." Purbright gave a faint smile. Flaxborough's definition of health has always included distance from embarrassment. Malley hesitated, then asked, "Do you think they'll all be remembered kindly, sir?" Purbright looked thoughtful. "In time, perhaps. The town will smooth them into anecdotes, and the edges will wear away. Flaxborough has no appetite for enduring guilt. It prefers things that fit into tea-time conversation." He picked up his pipe, unlit, and turned it slowly in his hand. "Still, I imagine the blossoms will be late this spring. The weather seems to know when to keep its head down." There was a pause, the comfortable kind that comes at the end of something understood if not entirely forgiven. Malley cleared his throat. "You're not taking it hard, sir. It's been a strange one." Purbright's gaze wandered toward the window, where the sunlight glinted on the station signboard. "Strange, yes. But Flaxborough rarely offers anything else. It has a way of presenting sin in homely packaging, lace curtains and clean ledgers, and when it ends, it always ends politely." He stood, stretching with deliberate ease. "I think I'll take a walk before the next crisis. The town looks almost innocent this morning. It would be rude not to notice." The walk took him through the high street, past the butcher's with its array of hopeful sausages, the greengrocer's pyramid of apples, and the hairdresser's window where Mrs. Hargreaves was already leaning in to whisper about something else entirely. Purbright greeted each person with his usual gentle civility, neither inviting nor avoiding conversation. He was a fixture in the town's moral architecture, solid, unthreatening, and faintly amused by its cracks. At the corner by the church he paused. The cherry trees, stripped now of their blossoms, stood bare and graceful against the sky. Beneath one, a few petals still clung to the damp earth, faded fragile reminders of celebration and death alike. Purbright regarded them for a moment, then knelt briefly, brushing a single petal from the heel of his shoe. "Even the trees tidy themselves," he murmured. "We could learn from them, though not too much." By afternoon, he was back in his office, dictating notes on minor matters. A bicycle theft, a quarrel over allotments, a lost spaniel. Outside, the sound of the market drifted faintly through the open window, comforting in its ordinariness. Malley returned with fresh tea and an expression of relief. "Peaceful day for once, sir." Purbright accepted the cup. "Peaceful, yes. But don't mistake peace for innocence, Sergeant. The town is only catching its breath." He leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. "If you ever want to understand Flaxborough, watch what it forgets. It never erases its sins. It just reclassifies them as misfortunes." Malley grinned. "That's rather grim, sir." "Not grim," said Purbright mildly. merely accurate. Still, accuracy is a luxury. Best not to spoil a quiet afternoon with too much of it. The clock on the wall ticked its small, practical rhythm. Purbright opened the next file, an unremarkable complaint about a neighbor's hens, trespassing on prize dahlias, and began to write with unhurried precision. Outside, the sun moved behind a cloud, and the first faint stirrings of a breeze carried the scent of damp earth through the window. Flaxborough, restored to its customary calm, carried on. There would be another parade next spring, another banner unfurled over the marketplace, and perhaps a new clerk at the building society, one less meticulous about figures, but more discreet about humanity. In the vicarage garden, Mrs. Prowse would sigh over the fragility of life, while at the Crown and Cushion, Mr. Wrigley would tell the story of the Pemble affair with generous embellishments and a wagging finger toward heaven. And somewhere between their versions, Purbright thought, the truth would settle. Not triumphant, not tragic, merely content to exist in the margins, where it belonged. He closed the file on the hens, placed it neatly atop the others, and allowed himself a quiet smile. The afternoon light fell across the desk, soft as dust. In Flaxborough, order had been restored, or at least restored enough for comfort.